Bridget Townsend was born in Bandera, Texas on June 26, 1983, and raised by her mother, Patricia. In 2001, 18-year-old Bridget was living in Texas, dating a man named Joe Leal, and working full-time at a resort in the area. She had also recently applied for nursing school and was anxiously waiting to see if she had been accepted when an unfortunate tragedy occurred. On January 14, 2001, Bridget stopped by her mother's work at a local video store to visit. Not long after, she told her mother she was heading to Joe's home to get some sleep because she had to drive to work in the morning. They said their goodbyes, unaware that it was the last time she would ever see her daughter alive. When Patricia arrived home that night, after closing up the video store, she had a strange feeling come over her after she thought she heard Bridget call out, "Mom." She began calling her, but there was no answer. She brushed off her feelings, believing her daughter wasn't answering because she was asleep. She even thought about driving over there, but talked herself out of it. The following day, her worst nightmares came true when she discovered that her daughter was missing. When Joe arrived home a little after midnight, he found Bridget's truck parked outside and her purse and keys on the counter inside. However, Bridget was not sleeping on the couch where he had expected her to be. So he checked the bedroom and found she wasn't there either. That's when he noticed the bedroom closet was open and that the small box he kept cash in was empty. He quickly became concerned because he said Bridget never took money without asking first. So he began calling friends and family to see if anyone knew where she was. He then searched the neighborhood with the help of his sister and a friend. When they still couldn't find her, he called the police and reported her missing. He also called his friend Ramiro, who had been at the house earlier that day. However, he denied ever being there. Joe then told him he should tell the truth because Bridget had already told him he had come by, but he continued to deny ever being there. As for Patricia, she then spent the next year or so searching for her daughter, posting flyers wherever she could. Then, in October 2002, she got the worst news of her life when the Bandera County Sheriff's Office called her into the station to tell her that Bridget was dead and had been since the night she went missing. They also had a suspect, a convicted killer named Ramiro Gonzalez, who was already serving life behind bars for the sexual assault and the murder of Florence Tyke. Gonzalez had contacted investigators and told them he had information on Bridget's murder, including where to find her body. First, he said that the Mexican Mafia and Joe hired him to kill her. He then changed his story and said that the Mexican Mafia wasn't involved, just him and Joe. He then finally told the truth. He said that on the night Bridget disappeared, he called Joe, who was a known drug dealer, to buy some cocaine, but Bridget answered and told him that Joe was at work. Knowing now that she was there alone, he drove to the house and knocked on the door. When Bridget answered, he walked past her to the bedroom closet, where he knew Joe kept his drugs and money. He found $650 in cash and put it in his pocket. Bridget asked him what he was doing, but he didn't respond. She then picked up the phone and started dialing Joe, but was quickly attacked by Gonzalez. He pushed her down, dragged her into the bedroom, and tied her up. He then asked if there were any drugs in the home, and she responded no. So he carried her out the front door and put her in his truck. He then drove her to his grandfather's ranch, 40 miles northwest of San Antonio, only stopping to get his grandfather's deer rifle. He then drove her deep into a wooded area of the ranch while she pleaded for her life, offering to give him money, drugs, and sex. He then sexually assaulted and shot her to death. Afterward, he left her body in a field, returned the gun to his grandfather's truck, and went home. He was then charged with capital murder. During the trial, he told the court that his childhood was filled with trauma and neglect, and that's what led him down the path of murder. He blamed his mother's alcohol use while pregnant with him and said he suffered from fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. He also claimed he was sexually abused as a child. He also apologized to Bridget's family, but Patricia refused to accept his excuses and apology. Regardless, in September of 2006, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. 6 different times his execution was postponed. Finally, on June 26, 2024, what would have been Bridget's 41st birthday, Patricia watched as her daughter's killer was executed by lethal injection. Carol Margaret Alford was born on February 16, 1944, and grew up in South Carolina. During high school, she met and fell in love with James Reginald Sumner, who went by Reggie. However, after graduating, they broke up and went their separate ways. Reggie joined the U.S. Navy and eventually married, but it didn't last long. After being discharged from the military, he got a job working with the railroad back in their hometown. Carol, on the other hand, married twice and divorced both times. Her second marriage didn't end well, and on February 18, 1987, while at home with her 10-year-old daughter Rhonda, her ex-husband knocked on her door. When she opened it, he shot her 6 times. He then fled the scene and took his own life. Thankfully, Carol survived, but the injuries left her suffering from chronic pain and blind in one eye. At that point, she required a lot of care from Rhonda. As time went on, she began to improve and once again was able to take care of herself, but sadly, in 1995, she was diagnosed with liver cancer. It turns out that the blood transfusion she received after the attack was infected with hepatitis C. Regardless of the diagnosis, she carried on and even got a part-time customer service job for a television cable company. 5 years later, 56-year-old Carol was still working the customer service job when she received a call from a familiar voice. It was her high school sweetheart, Reggie. After catching up, they met and had a wonderful date. Rhonda said that her mother had instantly fallen in love with Reggie all over again, and he felt the same way, and within 6 months, they were married. Within a year of the wedding, they sold their home in South Carolina and retired to Jacksonville, Florida. By mid-2005, Carol was now taking care of Reggie, who had debilitating diabetes and was most confined to a wheelchair due to a broken leg. All the while, Rhonda maintained constant communication with her mother on an almost daily basis. However, all that would change in July 2005 when she tried to call her but received no answer. For the next 3 days, she unsuccessfully tried to get in touch with them. Rhonda then decided to drive the 4 hours to Jacksonville to find out what was going on. When she arrived, their car was gone and the front door was strangely unlocked. Upon entering the home, she was greeted by their dog Mikey, but Reggie and Carol were nowhere to be found. She also found the house in disarray, with partially cooked food on the stove. It almost looked like they were cooking dinner and got interrupted. Plus, Rhonda knew her mother liked things clean and felt this was very much out of character. She then found her mother's purse with the cell phone they shared inside, along with all their medications. At that point, she knew something bad had happened and called and reported them missing. Police finally located their Lincoln Town car in a rural area of Florida and suspiciously found dirty shovels in the trunk. The first break in the case came when the couple's bank called and said that they had noticed an unusual cash withdrawal. They also had surveillance footage from the ATM. The case then took a crazy turn when they received a strange phone call from a man claiming to be Reggie, who also had a woman with him claiming to be Carol. Investigators were skeptical of the phone call and felt that whoever they had spoken to sounded much younger than they expected. So they brought Rhonda in to listen to the call, and she quickly confirmed it was not Reggie and Carol. They then traced the phone call and discovered that it was registered to a fake name and address. They also learned that the phone was used to call a car rental company in South Carolina. From there, they were able to determine that a Mazda RX-8 was rented by a woman named Tiffany Cole and matched the car seen in the ATM surveillance footage. It turns out that Tiffany and her father lived in the same neighborhood as Carol and Reggie in South Carolina, and they were all very close. Tiffany even bought a car from them when they were moving. Thankfully, the rental car had satellite tracking, which led police to a motel in South Carolina. 6 days after Carol and Reggie were reported missing, police raided a motel room and found 3 people inside: Tiffany Cole, her boyfriend Michael James Jackson, and their friend Alan Wade. It appeared they had gone on a shopping spree due to all the newly purchased items found inside the room. Amongst their belongings, police found the keys to Carol and Reggie's car and Reggie's prized coin collection. During the interrogation, Tiffany confirmed they robbed the couple, but claimed they had nothing to do with their disappearances. However, it would be a fourth accomplice by the name of Bruce Nixon who finally came clean. He said that in early June of 2005, Tiffany and Michael went to Carol and Reggie's home to finish the paperwork on the car they bought. When they arrived, Carol welcomed them in and even offered them food and a place to stay. However, during that stay, Carol and Reggie unfortunately let it slip that they had made a lot of money from selling their home in South Carolina. This intrigued Michael, so they left and spent the next month devising a plan to rob them. On July 8, 2005, Bruce and Alan showed up at their home, posing as stranded motorists. Michael was waiting outside, and once Carol and Reggie were restrained, he joined the men inside to ransack the house. They then put the couple in the trunk of their own car and drove them to a remote location in Georgia. Once there, they buried them alive in a hole they had pre-dug. An autopsy showed that their ultimate cause of death was asphyxiation. They then went back to the house with bleach and gloves and cleaned up the scenes. Afterward, they took the items they stole and pawned them. After confessing, Bruce led authorities to the location of their bodies. Afterward, all 4 individuals were arrested and charged with Carol and Reggie's murders. In the end, Tiffany, Michael, and Alan were all 3 sentenced to death. Bruce, on the other hand, was given 45 years in prison for cooperating with investigators. However, in 2017, Florida changed their law, requiring jurors to unanimously agree on the sentence. And since they were split 9-3 during her first trial, the death penalty was thrown out. A new jury was then brought in, and during the resentencing process, the law changed again to only require 8 out of 12 jurors. However, this time, 10 jurors voted to spare her life, and she was subsequently given life in prison. Matthew Marshall Chase, who went by Matt, was born on April 10, 1966, in Medford, Oregon. Matt was described as a very friendly individual with a great sense of humor. He loved to sing and act and was known for getting the lead in school plays and concerts. After graduating from North Medford High School in the mid-'80s, he moved to Hollywood, California with his 2 sibling friends, Steve and Teresa Dahl. On June 8, 1988, at 11:45 p.m., Matt and Teresa returned home from dinner when he realized he forgot to deposit his paycheck. So he decided to run out to the bank to do a night deposit. Teresa, concerned for his safety, lent him her red 1983 2-door Volkswagen GTI. He walked out of the house with only his bank card, never to be seen again. By the following morning, when he had failed to return home, Steve called his bank pretending to be Matt to see if he had used his card. To their surprise, it had been used multiple times, prompting them to call the police. Investigators discovered that after he deposited his paycheck, he returned to the same ATM about 30 minutes later and tried to withdraw $280 in cash, but that amount was over his daily limit, something he was aware of. He then tried 2 more times, one for $200 and one for $100. But since his paycheck hadn't cleared, all attempts failed. 11 minutes later, he tried again at a different location, and this time, a hidden camera caught an interesting scene. Standing behind him was a shorter, stockier man who investigators believe was forcing him to try and withdraw the money. They also believe that the attempts to withdraw more than the allowed amount were Matt's attempt at getting the authorities' attention. An artist was able to render a sketch of the suspect, but it never led to his identity. The attempts to withdraw money continued, and once his paycheck cleared, $400 was taken out. However, that was the last attempt because the ATM confiscated the card. It was dusted for fingerprints, but none were found. 2 weeks later, on June 27th, Teresa's car was found, and it had a blue bandana inside that had the letters ES, PBS, CLS, which suggested to investigators that his abductor and presumed murderer was a gang member. Authorities, along with Steve, Teresa, and Matt's parents, searched all over Oregon for him and found one possible lead at a homeless shelter. Several individuals recalled seeing a man matching his description coming in and getting food. However, it turned out not to be him. On September 17, 1988, human remains were found in a ravine in Pasadena, California. 7 months later, the remains were identified as belonging to Matt. He had sadly been shot to death. At that point, the case would go unsolved for the next 30 years. Finally, in 2018, investigators announced that they had identified the abductor and murderer as a 20-year-old gang member named David Meza, who went by the nickname Bear. However, he would never be brought to justice because within 48 hours of Matt's murder, he took his own life. His girlfriend was shown the photo from the ATM and instantly recognized him, officially closing the case. Layla Dawn Marie Cummings was born on November 7, 1976. In the summer of 1984, 7-year-old Layla was living with her mother, 26-year-old Mindy Lynn Cummings, and her 9-year-old brother in an apartment in Elk City, Oklahoma. Mindy was recently divorced from Layla's stepfather, Richard Norman Rogim Jr. The two met through Mindy's brother, who shared a cell with Rogim in a Michigan prison. He was in there serving a 4-year sentence for the vicious sexual assault of 2 teenage girls. Unfortunately, meeting and marrying Rogim was the worst decision of her life, and she had no idea the horrors he would bring down on her family after the divorce. On the night of July 6, 1984, Mindy had to work her shift at a local fast food restaurant and left Layla and her brother home alone. However, she asked the motel night clerk who worked across the street to keep an eye on the apartment. Around 1:30 a.m., he noticed the outdoor light at their apartment was now off and decided to go check on the kids. That's when he discovered Layla was missing. Her brother, on the other hand, was found asleep in the apartment unharmed. Officers quickly began searching the area, but sadly, there was no sign of her. The following morning, a farmer about 15 miles away in Falls, Oklahoma, found Layla's body in a field. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. That morning, investigators discovered a beer cup within 25 feet of the apartment and were able to collect a fingerprint. While they waited on the results, they looked into Rogim and found that he was at a local bar that evening until 11:50 p.m. They also learned that he called the dispatcher at his job at around 1:14 a.m., but then strangely asked the person to log the call as 12:35 a.m. When investigators searched the location where Layla's body was found, they noticed footprints and tire tracks. While the footprints were not distinguishable, the tire tracks matched the tires on Rogim's vehicle. That same day, they searched his bedroom and found a used condom in the trash, which matched the ones found on the ground near Layla's body. It turns out that the same brand of condoms was sold in a dispenser in the men's restroom at the bar he had been at on the night of the murder. They brought him in for questioning and asked his whereabouts on July 6th and into the morning of July 7th. He told them that after leaving the bar, he drove slowly to a small supermarket about 25 miles away, arriving at 1:10 a.m. After that, he claimed he went to his girlfriend's home in Deal City before returning home. Once the fingerprint results came back and matched Rogim, he was arrested on Friday, July 13th, and charged with Layla's abduction and murder. The following year, in 1985, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. However, he would spend years appealing the death sentence, claiming he was now a Zen Buddhist and would not be a threat to anyone. He also tried to gain sympathy from the court by telling them that he had a rough childhood and was raised by parents who were alcoholics. He had also spent the first 3 years of his life in a full body cast after being diagnosed with an orthopedic deformity and disability. After his father died in a bar fight when he was 3, his 17-year-old mother raised him in a 1,500-square-foot home with 13 other people. He was then sexually abused by his older stepbrother. In 2001 and 2006, his sentence was thrown out, but both times, just like in his first trial, the jury sentenced him to death. He continued to fight the sentence until he ran out of appeals in 2017, and on June 27, 2024, he was executed. Unfortunately, in 2005, Mindy got in trouble when she sold University of Oklahoma football memorabilia inscribed with fake autographs on eBay. She promised the proceeds would go to a children's charity, but she instead used the money for herself. She was then arrested and charged with 15 counts of wire and mail fraud. In all, she conned 400 people out of more than $83,000. In the end, she pleaded guilty to 1 count of mail fraud, was sentenced to 2 years in prison, and was required to pay restitution to the victims. Matthew Roy Logan Mills was born on August 16, 1998, in Bell County, Kentucky, to David and Marie. Matthew was described as a true country boy who loved the outdoors, hunting, and riding ATVs. He also enjoyed working and operating the heavy equipment and was said to be very good at it. By the fall of 2021, 23-year-old Matthew was employed by Charles DeWeese Construction in Allen County, Kentucky, and met a woman named Krista Louise Cheek, who also worked there. The two quickly formed a romantic relationship, which would sadly lead to a horrible tragedy. The relationship was far from perfect due to her ex-husband, Christopher Drake Alexander. Plus, Matthew's family felt that she was taking advantage of him due to the money he was giving her. Krista had been with Alexander for years, and they even had children together, but their relationship was very tumultuous, and on multiple occasions, it led to police and court intervention. One of those occasions was in March of 2010, when they got into an argument over their daughter's haircut. Alexander pushed Krista against the wall, leading to his arrest and a charge of 4th-degree assault. In the end, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 days in jail. On June 28, 2021, Krista and her kids were out of town at her friend Penny's home in Sumner County, Tennessee. When Alexander found out, he was pissed and drove to Penny's home. When he arrived, he drove through her electronic gate and then shoved her in order to gain access to the house. He was then charged with aggravated burglary, simple assault, and vandalism. It's unclear if those charges were ever resolved, but after the incident, Krista took out a domestic violence order against him. He then violated the order when he showed up at her house on August 25, 2021, to retrieve his motorcycle. When he showed up, she wasn't there, but he encountered her father, Scott Cheek, and the two got into a heated argument. He told Alexander that he wasn't allowed on his property, and he responded by saying he would kill him and Krista. Scott then fired 3 shots into Alexander's vehicle. He was arrested, but the charges were later dropped. In November, she had the order amended to remove the clause that prevented him from contacting her or going to her residence because Alexander's father was now in poor health and he could no longer serve as an intermediary between them. Also, around this time, tensions were boiling over between Matthew and Alexander. It wasn't helped that Krista became pregnant, and both men believed themselves to be the father. However, that would be a moot point after she miscarried on October 31, 2021. Not long before that, Alexander came by and kicked in her front door. He then allegedly pointed a gun at Matthew's head and threatened to kill him if he didn't end the relationship. Alexander was also harassing him and his family on Facebook and told Matthew's brother, and I quote, "No homie, you can take care of it or I will my way." On December 3, 2021, Alexander claimed that he and Krista were having sex and he saw Matthew watching them through the bedroom window. The following day, on December 4th, Matthew hung out with Krista and her daughters and had plans to spend the night. One of those daughters received a call from Alexander, who told her that he and a group of guys were going to come over to throw Matthew out. She didn't believe him, but still told her mother about it. Alexander claims he never said that. On Sunday, December 5th, 2021, Matthew continued hanging out with Krista and her daughters, while Alexander took his son to Bowling Green to see his father, who was now in hospice care. At 4:15 p.m., Alexander received a text from Krista saying she missed him and wanted to see him and that Matthew would be leaving soon. Krista later said she sent them because she was jealous that Alexander was seeing someone else. At 6 p.m., Alexander tried to contact Krista, but she didn't answer. He then sent his daughter a text saying he was on his way and would be there in 20 minutes. Krista then told Matthew he should leave to avoid a confrontation. So he walked outside, got in his red Dodge Ram 2500, and began to drive away, but stopped. Krista saw him and sent him a text asking if he wanted to speak with her, and he replied yes. So she walked outside and got in his truck with him. While they were talking, Alexander pulled up in his white 2010 GMC Yukon. Alexander's son typically kept a handgun on him, and when Alexander saw Matthew's truck, he asked him for the gun, and he gave it to him. Alexander later denied this and said his son didn't have his gun on him that day. He then pulled in behind Matthew's truck, and both Alexander and his son got out. His son went inside, while Alexander told Krista to get in his vehicle, which she did. At this point, there are conflicting witness statements. One witness account says that Alexander began taunting Matthew because Krista got in the truck with him. This prompted Matthew to get out of his truck, but whether or not he was armed depended on the witness. Krista claims she never saw Matthew with a gun. She said he had a metal coffee cup in his hand. Things that may or may not be true are that Alexander claims he heard Matthew charge his weapon, at which point he claims he attempted to drive off but spun his wheels instead. In a later statement, Alexander changed his story and forgot to add the part where he attempted to drive off. He then claims Matthew fired a shot at him, to which he responded by shooting him 4 times. He claims his shots were fired blindly over his shoulder, but somehow magically landed all 4 shots. At about 6:30 p.m., authorities responded to the shooting, and when they arrived, they found Matthew alive but in critical condition. He was transported to the medical center in Scottsville, but unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries. Alexander was also taken into custody at the scene. Found near Matthew's body were 2 phones, the metal coffee cup that Krista said she saw, a cigarette, and a gun, which some believe was placed there after Matthew was shot. Interestingly, Alexander's son would later tell investigators that after the shooting, he received a message from his dad that said, and I quote, "Tell them it was self-defense," to which he responded, "I will." He also told investigators that an hour before the shooting, his dad asked him if he thought Krista would say it was self-defense if he killed Matthew. His son responded by saying everything would be okay and that he didn't need to kill him. On December 22, 2021, Alexander was indicted by a grand jury and turned himself in shortly after. Before going to trial, Alexander was offered a plea deal for 35 years but declined. His defense team then sought to have the domestic violence order and the violation of it tried in a separate case, and the judge granted the motion. It was granted because Matthew wasn't part of those incidents that led to the order. This was very detrimental because it removed the prosecutor's ability to tell the jury about Alexander's past violent crimes. Then, Alexander's son was put on the stand to testify, and strangely, he couldn't recall any of the information he gave to investigators. He also originally told officers at the scene that he saw Matthew pull a gun on his dad, but while on the stand, he said he was in the house the entire time. Jurors were allowed to see the body cam footage of him saying that about Matthew pulling a gun, but weren't allowed to see the taped interview of him talking about his dad's plan to murder Matthew and wanting to claim it was self-defense. In the end, the jury found him not guilty on all charges, leaving Matthew's family and many others in complete shock. The jurors' decision, in many people's eyes, is one of the worst cases of injustice they've ever seen, especially considering they had the option to find him guilty of first-degree manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, or even reckless homicide, but they chose none of those options. Interestingly, Alexander's attorney was able to get another murderer off the hook in the same fashion. Do you think the case would have ended differently if the domestic violence order and its violations had been allowed during the trial? Let me know in the comments below.